African music station.
I am Mazi KK Odeluga.
Mazi Ejikeme Obasi.
Na Mazi Oke Okachuku.
This is Straight Talk Radio, the world as we see it.
Coming to you from WGHC 98.3 FM. Your voice, your music, your station.
Listen to us this and every Saturday at 4 to 5 p.m. U.S. Central, and this and every Tuesday at 9 to 10 p.m. U.S. Central.
Ndewono.
Hey, Igbo kwenu. Hey, Mono. Hey, Sotano. Hey, Atano. Hey, Kwesoni. Hey.
Good evening and welcome to another program. This is Straight Talk Radio. You are listening to us on WGHC 98.3 FM, your voice, your music, your station. And I am Mazi Oke Okachuku.
Mazi KK Odeluga.
Mazi Ejike Obasi.
And we welcome you and thank you for listening to us. We're back to you today, and we want to continue the conversation we were having the other day. We kind of left it suspended and hanging. But before we get there, we want to tell you, we want to say Happy Independence Day to all the Ghanaians and all the Ghanaians immigrants celebrating the 61st Independence anniversary today. So happy Independence. Hopefully that means that good things from now onwards, right?
Absolutely.
So
we're happy for them.
As we celebrate Ghana independence, we were discussing violence in our communities and how we deal with it. And we started discussing violence in the U.S., and we talked about violence starting from where we are currently in Chicago and trying to look at the causes of violence. We actually got down to a set of things that we talked about that contribute to the violence or add fire to the flame, add fuel to the fire, if you will. We talked about poverty, exploitation, despair, and hopelessness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were getting to the point of how we handle it, and we are seeing that actually as humans and also in the different societies, even in the one that we live in, we have ways that we handle or try to treat violence based on who's perpetuating it, who is being perpetuated on, their status, and our makeup and preferences. So we were getting to the part that had to do with gun violence, and we were actually discussing the current event. We came close to the current events that happened in Parkland, Florida, and that's where we kind of suspended it.
Yes.
So I'm not sure we want to start there. I think we actually want to start a different place. We want to shift a little bit and color our discussion today by talking to someone who has actually worked with people who have experienced violence. And we are going to be talking to Emmanuel Ogebe. And actually, I'll let you do the intro.
Mazio
Deluga.
Yes.
You know him.
Yes. Emmanuel, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Doc.
Yeah. Attorney Emmanuel Ogebe is a human rights activist and one that I have been quite acquainted with his work. He works for Justice for Jaws and has been a frequent expert witness in many congressional hearings, and actually participated in a few congressional delegations, especially to Nigeria. And I met him when we were working, part of the Nigerian working group with under Igbo League, and a group of us were working on getting the U.S. government to declare Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist organization. And so he is one that is quite adept and has its foot on the ground regarding what's going on in that neck of the woods. And so today we want to discuss violence against girls, especially within the Nigerian political space. Many of us know about the Chibok girls and what has happened with the Chibok girls. But also now we have the yes.
The Apache
girls
yes.
that are also have faced similar experience. So, Mr. Ogebe, you're welcome to Straight Talk. With me is Mazi Ejike Obasi and Mazi Okachukwu. So,
welcome.
We will be fielding questions and hopefully you can give us better insight. Now, where are we? Can you explain to our listeners? Can you give a little insight to our listeners who Boko Haram, the terrorist group Boko Haram, what are they?
Yes. Well, thank you very much for having me on the program. And I'll try not to disappoint you. And at the same time, try not to overload you with too much information. The Boko Haram is an extremist group that actually emerged as far back as 2002. Now, what many people don't realize is not only the longevity of the group, but its antecedents. With the introduction of Sharia law, which many of us viewed as unconstitutional, there were certain radical elements who wanted it to be implemented in a strict Taliban-style fashion. Now, our research indicates that some of the initial members of Boko Haram actually modeled it along the line of what was obtaining at the time in Afghanistan. That's why they had their base in the mountains of Borno called Kandahar. They called their base Kandahar. So they actually styled it along the lines of the Taliban. But let me add two very important historical components to Boko Haram. One is that a number of Nigerians were lured to Sudan under the pretext that they were being given scholarships. They were then indoctrinated in radicalism and jihad by bin Laden. So when the U.S. Attacked bin Laden to try and punish him for what happened,
the Coles bombing.
Exactly, it was the Coles and the Kenyan bombings.
Yes.
So some of those fighters, Nigerians who had gone and joined him and Al Qaeda, went back home, while some followed him to Afghanistan. So when the U.S. now invaded Afghanistan to get him for 9/11, some of them suffered what they call catch and release. The U.S. government caught them, but they decided that these ones were low-risk elements, maybe because of their skin color. So they didn't bring them to Gitmo, they released them to go back. And these characters went back to Nigeria, and they created, the militant jihadi group known as Boko Haram.
Yes. Thank you for that insight. So what, in your estimation, created the environment for their emergence and flourishing within the Nigerian space?
Yes, that's a good question. As I mentioned, the imposition or the introduction of Sharia law into northern Nigeria was actually the catalyst. A lot of us do not buy the theory that it was purely economic disenchantment. No, a lot of it had to do with indoctrination. Now, when the Sharia was introduced in the 12 states, it was their form of secession against the Nigerian state because an infidel was now ruling the country. So the response was, if we cannot rule the whole nation, at least within our states, let us rule ourselves under Sharia law. So it was a protest. So when the Sharia was passed, and they were not bringing people out to the stadium to stone them to death, like was being done in Afghanistan, some people were disenchanted and said, this is not, what we were hoping for. So they essentially wanted a more puritanical and more extreme version of Sharia law. And so in December 2003, they launched their first violent attack on Christmas Eve, no less, to show you the intention. It was clearly at that point a group that was against Christianity and against anything Western, because they equate anything Western with Christianity. So you have to understand that worldview, they have the same way that Islam is fused. In other words, it's a way of life. Governance, democracy, commerce, everything is all one. It's theocratic. They also view everything Western as being Christian, not realizing that we have distinctions within sectors.
Yes.
So these were some of the more immediate factors that spurred this group to begin its militancy.
Yes. Thank you for that very nice introduction, because I think it is good to lay the stage for how things are going. And before we actually get to where we want to finally end up with, which is with these girls that have been abducted and other more recent acts of violence, I wanted to ask a question that has bothered me for a while.
Yes.
For many years, people who work with civil rights in the Nigerian context recognized that Boko Haram was not a benign bunch of disfranchised people, that there was something deeper and more sinister involved with that movement. And yet, both within the Nigerian government and, in fact, many foreign governments, the narrative kept being driven that, these are not troublemakers. These are just make the country better and they will all go away. Can you speak to that factor, the way governments helped Boko Haram develop to what it is today?
Yes, there was a failure at multiple levels of government in containing Boko Haram from the earliest. Rather than that, there was even a sense of that occurred. You will find that in Borno State, for example, the governor at the time found them a willing tool for his political agenda. And so Boko Haram was operating in broad daylight. We need to recognize that this group had facilities, they had land, they had properties, and they were operating in broad daylight. Now, the mistake that these people made was the classical tale of the tiger rider who enjoyed the ride, but when it was time to dismount, he didn't know what to do.
Yes.
Because he had so empowered the tiger that trying to dismount it, it would just gobble you up. So we had a situation where a preceding government allied with them, pumped funds into them, and utilized them against perceived enemies. Now, at a certain point in time, a member of his cabinet for religious affairs, again, harking back to the issue of Sharia, because those states, in violation of the Constitution, which has clear separation of church and state, introduced a state religion and had commissioners of religion and religious affairs. At a point, the commissioner for religious affairs in Borno State wanted to resign in pursuit of the purist Islamic tenets of Boko Haram. When the governor saw this, he realized that this was the point at which he would be declared an apostate if somebody left his cabinet to go and join Boko Haram.
Yes.
So he dissolved his cabinet And that was how the man made his way into Boko Haram. And Boko Haram began distancing itself from the government of the day. So at that state level, there was enablement. At the federal level, Boko Haram had become a problem. And what was happening was that they were killing Christians, unabashedly and without any inhibitions. And so people tolerated it because they thought it was
Christians
only Christians being killed. Exactly. Mm-hmm. They would stop you and you would recite the Shahada and they would let you go. But once you're a Christian, you will be killed. So people were comfortable knowing that they could easily recite the Quran for these people. So it was when they began to attack the police and state organs that it became problematic. And I should point out that, the leaders of Boko Haram at a point were even sent on exile. At a point, one was even charged to courts in Nigeria for prosecution.
Yes.
But political intervention came in, and he was called out and charged to be of good behavior and handed over to Islamic clerics. So he never faced the full wrath of the law. Even the ones who were on exile in Saudi Arabia came back and begged their elders, and the elders said, all right, they should come back so long as they're of good behavior. Mm. And, the rest is now history. They came back further, indoctrinated and further radicalized, and then they unleashed, their jihad on the populace. So I should point out that the turning point where it went from a radical extremist group to an insurgent group was after the state authorities tried to clamp down on Mohammed Yusuf, and which resulted in his death, and the group going underground. And when they came back, they had metastasized, and they had evolved into an insurgent group, and ultimately became the world's #1 terrorist group.
Yes. Can you also speak to their participation or not in the post-election violence that saw of 2006, that is the election of Jonathan,
Goodluck
Jonathan,
right.
When he ran against Buhari.
Yes, in 2011.
2011, that's right.
Yes. Now, it's a very interesting phenomenon. There was post-election violence in a dozen states in northern Nigeria, and I led a team to investigate and conduct fact-finding. And we found it intriguing that out of the 19 states in the north, it was only 12 where there was election violence, and all the 12 were the Sharia states. Mm. It is a very, very amazing coincidence. And so we saw that there must be a causal nexus between the fact that it was Sharia states and the violence that was displayed in those communities. Now, upon investigating further, we saw survivors and eyewitnesses. There was a woman in Kaduna who was stopped. Her and her children were asked to recite the Shahada, which they couldn't because they were Christians. Mm. And they slit the throat of the boy in front of the mother. Mm. So the mother now cried out and said, "You have killed my son, you must kill me as well." And the attackers, we will call them at this point, now discussed among themselves and said, quote, "But they said we should not kill women." Mm. So when we heard this testimony, that told us that this was a premeditated act or an atrocity.
Of violence, yes.
It wasn't the heat of passion.
Yes.
It was not spontaneous protest. This was a premeditated program. Now, interestingly, our investigations also showed that prior to the post-election violence, that there were young men who were arrested after they raped a Christian girl in Bauchi, and on their machetes, they had stickers of CPC, which was Buhari's party at the time.
Yes.
So all of this evidence is put together showed us that there was a systematic plan to attack, kill, and pillage. Now, interestingly, this is the same sort of information we found when we were investigating in 2012 a Boko Haram attack in Kano.
Yeah.
A couple of individuals from a bank were fleeing to go home because they heard that there was an attack ongoing in in Kano.
Mm-hmm.
When they got to the military checkpoint, to the Boko Haram checkpoint, they shot the male driver of the vehicle in the head, and his brain material and tissue just even spilled on the woman who was his passenger to the right. So she started screaming and wailing, as you would expect a sane person to do. So one of the Boko Haram attackers pointed a gun at her and wanted to finish her. Then his comrade tapped him and said, "No, they said we should not kill women." So, taken together, we know that this is, circumstantial evidence, but the terms of engagement.
They have some kinds of rules of engagement. That's what you're saying.
Yes, the rules of engagement of the Boko Haram seem to be in tandem with the rules of engagement of the post-election violence. And by the time you realize that Boko Haram, when they came to negotiate with the Jonathan government for peace, nominated General Buhari. By the time you look at as one of the mediators, by the time you look at the fact that at a certain point, General Buhari actually accused President Jonathan of fighting against the North when he was fighting against Boko Haram, you will see that there are certain relationships there that need to be further explored and explained. But they clearly seem to have a similar agenda.
But isn't it interesting that when Buhari ran in the last election, that part of the reason he was elected was because the Nigerian populace kind of perceived or hoped that he may have a better way of dealing with that problem. What has been the effort of his government?
Well, yes, he ran on the ticket of peace and stability and restoring stability to the Nigerian space.
Yes.
So I think what you're asking is, so what is his track record?
Yes.
Since he ran on this.
Well, I mean, clearly his track record is plain for all to see. Not only has he underperformed Goodluck Jonathan, who he succeeded, but he has even underperformed his own track record from 35 years ago when he was in office. General Buhari at this point is an unmitigated disaster, and there's no other way to explain it. Now, there were three factors that propelled him to office as far as, peace and security were concerned. One of them was that he is a retired general who has combat experience, and, people assume that he would do better than Jonathan, who was, a university lecturer and had come from the ivory towers, which is a golden cage existence. The second factor that people analyzed was this man had been nominated by Boko Haram, as a mediator. So they must have some level of respect for him.
Yes.
And they must have some, channels of communication. So some of that analysis implied that he would be able to rein in these people. And then thirdly, for many who felt that the Boko Haram insurgency had reached crescendo levels because an infidel in quotes was in power, felt that this was a form of appeasement.
Yes.
if we allow power to be ceded to these people, hopefully they will stop killing us. That was what it amounted to. That's why a lot of us say that the election was not free and fair. There was a clear element of intimidation. People felt that if this man was not giving his wish, he would not. There would be no peace, because he himself has said that the blood of hyenas and baboons would mix.
Yes.
So he had incited violence, and he had a track record of being able to do it. So these are some of the factors, and he has come into power now, and
Emma
continues.
Okay, good. For a moment, we were not hearing you. Yeah, you're good. You're back good again. So
Okay.
Continue, yes.
Yes, so I was saying that, he has come into power now, and now I expect the insurgency continues. Rather, he's selling us property. Apart from unboxing.
Are you on a cell phone?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
Okay.
because your voice
You must
is
be moving or
yeah, you
something.
must be moving around. Your voice is coming in and out.
Oh, I apologize.
That's
for that.
okay. That's okay.
Yes.
That's okay.
But you can hear me now.
Yes,
Yes.
perfectly. Yes.
Yes. So my point is that, he came up with this curious expression of technical defeat,
Yes.
and it's usually a boxing term when you have a technical knockout. It's not one you apply to, combatant warfare.
That's
You
right.
don't have technical defeat. You either have a defeat or you have a surrender.
Yes.
But you don't have a technical defeat. So the man has sold us propaganda in place of victory. And this, of course, was confirmed to the entire world when 2 weeks ago, 110 girls were abducted from Dachi in Yobe State. This is almost 4 years after Chibok happened. And what everyone is saying is that, you were a general, you have not shown, the benefits of your training, and you had the script of what happened with Jonathan, and you have not shown the benefit of hindsight
Yes.
or 2020 vision. So you are a complete failure. About General.
Okay, I think we are having technical difficulties. I think your phone is moving in and out. But while we're trying to get that back on, you are listening to WGHC 98.3 FM, your voice, your music, your station. And this is Straight Talk Radio. Straight Talk Radio is sponsored by the Igbo American Heritage Foundation. And this foundation, the work of this foundation is to make our culture, Igbo people, well known in the Americas and beyond. And as we do this, we partner with and click on the donate button, and whatever you could afford to. We really appreciate it, and we thank you for your gift. All gifts are tax deductible, and we thank you. For those who would like to call in and be part of the conversation, the number here to call is 773-942-7167. We ask you to give us maybe another 30 minutes before you make the call so that we could be able to finish the conversation with our guests. But if you want to, you could actually go ahead. If you're listening to us on Facebook Live, you could go ahead and
Leave
put
a
in your
comment,
comments.
yes.
Or your questions, and we will read it when we're finished with our guest. If you're yet to, and you would like to be able to listen to the radio station even when you are not at home or on Facebook Live, you could download the TuneIn Radio app on Android, or you could also download from the App Store the WGHC 98.3 FM app, and you could listen to us. If you want to hear audio only, you could call the number 1-563-999-3221, or join us if you haven't already on Facebook Live, WGHC 98.3 FM page, and you could listen to us live. Once again, we thank you for listening, and we thank you for your donations. You're listening to Straight Talk Radio.
Yeah, while we're waiting to reconnect with Mr. Ogebe, I think it's this is really interesting what we are hearing.
Yes.
And I hope we get him back online, because there are some very serious questions that need to be asked and discussed. This is somebody who has made a life of advocating for the underprivileged Christians in northern Nigeria predominantly, and he has a lot of information. I am made to understand he's back online again.
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So good. I was going to ask you, so we've been kind of leading up to where we are today. We've talked about the Chibok girls. This is something that made international news.
Bring back our
in
girls,
fact, hashtag Bring Back Our Girls became known the world over. As somebody who is intimately connected with this, can you tell us today how many of the Chibok girls really have been returned to their parents? Do you know? Is there a number?
No, that's a good question, because I can tell you that a little over 106 girls
Yes.
have returned since May of. Well, actually, the government negotiated the release of some of the girls, and a few escaped.
Okay.
Now, they returned to Nigeria, but they did not return home. There's a distinction
Okay.
and a difference. What happened was the government of Nigeria decided that these girls who had been released from captivity, some who had escaped on their own, should be sequestered in Abuja, away from their parents and from their communities. This was a monumental travesty, because you need to understand that Chibok was a village in northeast Nigeria, and most of those girls had never seen a town. Most of them did not even know, what Abuja looked like. And so to come and expecting to meet your family and your familiar, your loved ones,
Surroundings, yes.
to now come and be cloistered away behind walls of the secret police or the SSS was a very traumatic experience for them.
Can you, how old were these girls?
Well, at the time of the abduction,
Yes.
the youngest one, and I represent her mother,
Yes.
the youngest one was 16.
Okay.
And, what has happened is, unfortunately, that one is still not back till today. But the age ranged in age from 16 to about 19.
Yes.
That was the age range of the girls at the time. So it wasn't till actually a matter of a couple of months ago that some of the girls finally reached Chibok. So you have a situation where girls who escaped for over a year had not reached their village and their community and their homes. And even while they were in Abuja, access was denied to everyone. Their parents would be brought in to spend a couple of days and then, go back. And they were limited as far as access to their stories and what happened. So till today, we don't know what the Nigerian government is hiding.
So is okay.
So they were not allowed freely to be debriefed?
There was no debrief that we're aware of. At least, we had asked the government on numerous times. We said, look, the proper thing to do, bring all the families, the parents to Abuja, have a session between the girls and the parents, so that even the parents of the ones who are not back will have an idea how their daughters are doing.
Yes.
But the government refused to do that. It was only the parents of the ones who were released who were allowed to come to Abuja and see see the girls.
And what would have been ideal was actually whatever help they were being offered could have better been offered within the context of their own cultural environment. So
Absolutely. And we made the point that, you see, our own African culture has some inherent mechanisms
For healing.
trauma healing.
For healing, yes.
We are not Westerners who will send you a flower and a card when somebody dies.
Well, they have psychologists. That
They
can
have
help,
psychologists.
which we do not. In that,
Which we do not. But
Yes.
our own mechanism is different in
Absolutely,
the sense
yes.
that, people will troop into your home and sit on the floor and cry with you so that you are not left alone or lonely.
yes,
And so those kinds of mechanisms is why, I think the incidence of melancholy, depression, and so on and so forth are actually lesser in our society in spite of all the challenges we face
yes,
because of our communal, coping mechanism.
yes.
So we felt that bringing these girls to an alien city like Abuja, which is very sterile and hostile, it's an artificial city, was not salubrious to their development. And we felt that they had left one prison, they had traded one prison for another prison. They were state captives in Abuja for the longest time. And I don't know how many of you are aware, but towards the end of last year or so, one of the girls in Abuja attempted suicide. And you will sit down and say, how could this girl have been with Boko Haram for over 2.5 years? She didn't attempt suicide. It was when she was supposedly free in the custody of the Nigerian government that she attempted suicide. How horrible must the government have been that she would attempt such a thing?
yes. Now, let me ask you, what in your estimation is the obsession of this terrorist group with young girls?
Well, that's a good question. There are a couple of explanations. One of them is that they see themselves as being in a holy war, a jihad.
Yes.
And under jihad, they are entitled to spoils of war, of booty, which includes, taking away pagan and infidel girls. Now, interestingly, my research indicates that many years ago when the jihad was on, that a number of Islamic clerics decided that they should stop fighting the minority pagans in the north. And the reason they did that was they said, look, if we conquer them and make them Muslims, then we cannot raid them and take their women and loot their properties because they're fellow Muslims.
Yes.
So let's allow them to remain pagans so that we can have our way with them at our will. This is a very interesting footnote of history.
Yes.
So you're making reference to the Usman Dan Fodio-led jihad.
Exactly.
Actually, because what you just said opens up a totally different vista for discussion. Because for people of Nigerian descent, there is that concept of one North policy, that the North is a unified whole. Anything north of the River Niger and Benue, they are all uniformly same. Now you begin to show us that perhaps that is not so. Perhaps
far from it.
Yes. That's very unfortunate. That is very unfortunate. On another radio show, we had talked about people that come from what is considered northern Nigeria, that have actually fought vehemently or vigorously against these injustices. And this story you just told, again, lends credence to this.
Yes.
But,
yes.
Let's look at a different aspect that I sometimes wonder. If we look at Sudan, for example, where a lot of these people were taken to train as Islamic, scholarship. During the civil war in Sudan
and South Sudan,
a lot of violence towards women were actually used as a calculated method of winning a war. In other words, they were used as pawns in warfare.
Yes.
The Janjaweed come to mind.
Yes.
Do you see similarities?
Yes. I mean, it's the weaponization of sexuality.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and that is what happened. The Boko Haram saw women, infidel women, as the booty, the spoils of war that they were entitled to. And then, of course, the element of subjugation and domination, bringing them or forcefully converting them, and so on and so forth. There's so many elements into it. Now, here's the other thing. For a group like that, they have to have some instant gratification for the young boys who the
Foot soldiers.
Yes, for these foot soldiers.
Yes.
And so this was another, a trophy and so on and so forth that they could immediately get, since their caliphate was not immediately,
coming to fruition
as they anticipated. So that is part of the fascination. Now, unfortunately, the other driver is the fact that there was a global response to the Chibok horror that gained them a notoriety that they hadn't attained. Now, let me transpose the Chibok abductions with two responses from other global jihadi groups.
Yes.
Al-Qaeda denounced Boko Haram for the wholesale abduction of schoolgirls.
Mm-hmm.
However, ISIS actually decided to emulate Boko Haram for the wholesale abduction of schoolgirls. So within months of Chibok happening, ISIS now abducted Christian and Yazidi girls.
Yes.
In Iraq.
Yes.
And this was their own way of saying, you people have set the precedent for us, and we're going to follow that precedent. Do you know that these two groups that originally were rivals in the sense that they were trying to outdo each other in wickedness and sheer horrific acts, ultimately ended up merging as one caliphate?
Yes.
Yes.
So Boko Haram, that initially started out on the model of Al-Qaeda, has ended up now being acquired by ISIS.
Actually, was exactly 3 years ago, almost exactly, was March 7,
In March.
2015, that they declared their allegiance to the
Yes,
Islamic
precisely. Precisely. And incidentally, today I was at an event with Secretary Tillerson, where he was recounting his policy thrust for Africa prior to his departure. And he pointed out that he just designated ISIS West Africa last week as a terrorist organization. So that is an interesting development, because
ISIS West Africa, meaning AKA Boko Haram.
Yes.
Well, Boko Haram had been designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S. Why do it again?
Well, it's a question of nomenclature.
Yes.
I think he was doing that in effect to cover the new alliance.
Yes.
Like how you say successors in title are bound by this agreement.
The same agreement.
Right.
That's right.
So in this particular case, he wanted to make sure that the new successors in title are bound. by designation. So,
if I may ask this question, because you said you were there in the discussions with Secretary Tillerson. From your discussions, it is clear that this violence perpetuated against children, actually, because to call them women is, I feel, a very big misnomer. A 16-year-old girl is not a woman. She is a child.
Yes.
Okay. In this country, United States, sex with that child is statutory rape. So we have a situation where it is clear that the people perpetuating this crime are obeying orders clearly from their superiors, who I would assume are probably people of substance within the Nigerian context.
To be able to finance them.
Is there any move or any discussion at all of trying to unmask the people behind these atrocities and bringing them to justice?
Okay, now that's a very good question. And let me start by saying that with the Dapchi abductions,
yes,
the youngest of the Dapchi girls who were taken are 11 years old.
You see?
So this is even a worse atrocity than the Chibok abduction. Because I issued a report last week. I don't know if you all have had the opportunity of seeing it. But we did a comparative analysis of both abductions.
Yes, I saw that document, yes.
And what is interesting is that in Chibok, the people actually may not have even come intending to carry those girls because they came without vehicles. So they marched the girls away and for a long time before they went and stole trucks and came to load them in. But in Dapchi, they came wearing military uniforms and they came with vehicles to cut away the girls. In fact, one of the people I interviewed last week said that when Boko Haram confronted her, they asked her where are the girls, and she was trying to run. And they told her, look, we're not here to kill people. We're here to pack girls. So they stated their objective from the very beginning. Now, the issue here is this, that beyond the bestial need for the girls as sex slaves and so on and so forth, they have unfortunately now become monetized.
Yes.
The decision of the Nigerian government to pay ransoms has made these young girls a commodity.
Yes.
Now, in addition to that, we must recognize, as you rightly pointed out, that Boko Haram had actually been using them as weapons of war. And that is why Boko Haram is now the world's largest deployer of suicide bombings in world history. As at the beginning of this year, they have deployed over 200 women and children as suicide bombings. Now, let me point out that last year was the ultimate evil, where they deployed a woman with a baby on her back as a suicide bomber, killing both the woman and the baby and others. So that is the height of evil, if ever one could find a level.
Now, let me ask you, there's been so much made of, there was an Obama response where he sent military aid, sent financial aid, logistical aid. What became of the U.S. assistance to Nigeria to quell this scourge?
Okay, so I will answer that as well as finish up my response to the previous question, which is what is being done to hold people accountable for this atrocity.
Yes.
Now, I did a report 2 or 3 weeks ago where I talked about the first conviction for the Chibok abductions. There was a man called Haruna, and I believe he was given, was it 7 or 8 years imprisonment? And this is somebody who admitted in court that he has killed countless people. He admitted that he was part of those who abducted the girls. He admitted that he actually raped one of the girls. Although he said that they courted or they had a romantic affair. You cannot have a romantic affair with somebody who is in your custody as a prisoner.
Yes.
Because consent is negatived by the restraint.
Yes.
So anyhow, this man who admitted all of these things was given 8 years imprisonment. And we said that this is not fair and just.
Yes.
If the girls are still in captivity up to 4 years, and you give the man only 8 years, you have pretty much legitimized abduction.
Yes.
Now, as to the big wigs who are behind this whole madness, no big wig has been held to account. There's a senator who was being tried for his affiliations with Boko Haram. The man is still in the Senate till today. So it is really small fry and foot soldiers who are being prosecuted. Now, to go back to your more recent question about the Obama initiatives.
Yes.
One of them was they were meant to be helping find the girls. About 4 different nations announced all manners of assistance, and